The unrest around the country this weekend stemmed from another case of a police officer killing an unarmed and, in this instance, handcuffed African American. We talked about why these cases keep happening with Anthony Ramirez. He's a former police officer and now an attorney at Warnock McKinley Law.
Anthony, good to see you again. Thank you so much for joining us. Why does this keep happening between police and African Americans? What is going on out there?
Ted, I wish that I knew the answer to that. As you probably know, law enforcement leaders across the nation are speculating and asking themselves that very question this weekend. I think, genuinely why the protests are occurring, or the looting and the rioting are occurring, is a disconnect between, or lack of trust between the police and the public. It's certainly a tragic situation.
Indeed. But again, to the original incident with the officer with the knee on the neck of a man who's handcuffed and unarmed, what is going on?
So, I think that the vast majority of police officers that swear the oath to serve and protect, they do that. I would say 99.9%. Every once in a while, and you and I talked about previous stories where these pop up from time to time, you have an officer that'll cross the line. And, I think it's like any other job. You have people that sneak in and behave inappropriately. Certainly there is absolutely no excuse for what that officer did, and he's going to be prosecuted for that, and justice will be served. But police officers, every police officer that I've either worked with in the past or that I know right now that I'm acquaintances with, know that this was inappropriate and should have never happened. Number one, they're trained that the area around the neck is very sensitive. Obviously, it's a very dangerous place to do anything to. The fact that Mr. Floyd was handcuffed and incapacitated when this was going on makes it that much more egregious.
The responsibility of the other three officers at the scene. I think a lot of frustration and a lot of what I'm hearing from protesters is that, yes, there are bad cops out there, but until the good cops do something about the bad cops, nothing's going to change.
Sure. And, that's one of the things with the culture of law enforcement. You've heard about the thin blue line. And, police officers like to look out for one another. And that's fine when they're protecting each other, when they're in harm's way and they've got each other's back. That's fantastic. But, those three officers, when they were there on the scene, they had a duty, to protect Mr. Floyd, just like any other member of the public. And when they saw one of their officers acting unreasonably, I would have, the right thing for them to do would have been to stop him. If need be, physically grab him and pick him up off of Mr. Floyd. Mr. Floyd wasn't going to. He was handcuffed. So, those three officers, they should be held accountable. I don't know, what the charges for those three should be because they didn't actually physically handle him. There's a lot of people that think that they should be charged with murder or manslaughter as well. I don't know the answer to that question, but certainly they should be held accountable.
What needs to change as far as training law enforcement so that when you do see, we understand the thin blue line, we understand the camaraderie and teams and protecting each other in law enforcement. Everyone understands that, but we also understand that when you see bad things, you hear bad. I mean, we want to go back to Serpico or something here, but
Sure.
There's got to be internal discipline.
There does, and I think that the issue is not so much with initial training. Every police officer gets training in use of force, especially now today, racial sensitivity, things like that. But, as far as officers, and I told you, they'll sneak in, just go back to a job interview for any job. Everybody puts on their nice suit. They put on their best behavior. Obviously with police officers, they go through an extra line of psychological testing and background checks, but people sneak in that shouldn't be there. And the reality of it is that once they're in, and if something happens, they need to be able to weed these people out a lot faster. So it's my understanding that Officer Chauvin and even some of the other officers there on the scene in Minnesota had prior discipline problems that were not addressed, or at least they were still on the job. What needs to happen is that some sort of change needs to happen with the way that police unions interact with the rank and file, because most, if not all, police departments are unionized, and they have very, very strong union protections, and it's very difficult to remove a police officer once they're on the job. So I think that there needs to be some sort of conversation around that when a problem does manifest itself. I think that police departments need to be very transparent. I know the Phoenix Police Department is making a move to be much more transparent than they have in the past. And that's something that needs to happen in order, if you want to prevent these things from happening in the future.
And you talked about the hiring process. Does there need to be a way to weed some of these people? We've heard about gypsy cops. They get in trouble in one spot, they wind up in another spot, they get in trouble there, they keep moving on. Something should be done about that, correct?
No, I think it does. When you take every department's a little bit different, but when you take these entrance exams, they put you through the MMPI. I think, in fact, it's the Minnesota Multiphasic Inventory, a psychological test. They put you through a Wonderlic test. They put you through a lie detector. They do all of these things to try to detect issues that an individual might have. But again, people, can lie, people can put on an act, and they can sneak through. I really think that as far as the initial training, you can only do your best. And I think that once somebody is in, it's really about, maintaining that training. But, going back to your point about the officers on the scene, it's really about changing the culture and having police officers stand up for not for one another, but to one another when they see something going wrong. There would have been nothing wrong. And in fact, I believe that Mr. Floyd would be alive today if one of those officers had seen Officer Chauvin doing that and simply told him, hey, look, you need to get off of his neck. And, if need be, pick Officer Chauvin up by his arm there, to help him up. But, all they needed to do was say something.
Yeah. And real quickly here, as far as the response by police officers to the civil unrest that we're seeing, the looting, the peaceful protests, we've had a number of reports of peaceful protesters being treated aggressively by police. What are you seeing out there, and is that appropriate?
So, I've obviously been watching all this take place over the television, so I'm not out there. I have seen a few instances where police officers did use some excessive force. I think it was Atlanta. Some officers were fired over the weekend. I don't know a lot about that. Again, when you have adrenaline, when you have fear, and perhaps a lack of training in certain circumstances, you're going to have things happen. I think that the looting and the rioting that has been taking place this weekend is doing a disservice to the memory of Mr. Floyd. It has nothing to do with peaceful protest. I certainly support peaceful protest, and I think most law enforcement officers do. Police officers take an oath to protect people. And I remember when I was a police officer in the District of Columbia, standing on the line protecting members of the Westboro Baptist Church on one side and the public that wanted to get to them. And you take that duty very seriously to protect people's civil rights and their right to protest, whether or not you agree or disagree with their movement. And so I commend the police officers. I certainly am. I'm glad I'm not one today. And I hope that they remain safe out there.
And last question, we only got about a minute left here, so relatively quick. What needs to be done to build trust between law enforcement and the African American community?
I think we're on the right track with transparency. After some of these other incidences that we've seen in the last year and a half, we've seen commissions and meetings and a lot of groupthink going on. I think we really need to start seeing some action. I think that, when we do see these problems pop up, that they get dealt with swiftly. And I think that there needs to be much more transparent dialogue between these departments and the African American community.
All right. Attorney and former police officer Anthony Ramirez. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Ted, thanks for having me, and it's always good to see you.